In my whole career, I've never seen anything like this.
Lady Louise Windsor had barely finished speaking when the room changed. Conversations stopped, faces tightened, and across the palace, one sentence began traveling faster than anyone could contain it. Camilla will never hold the place Diana left behind. It was not whispered anonymously or buried inside a private letter. Louise had said it clearly, deliberately, and in front of people who understood exactly how dangerous those words could become. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Louise was not known for confrontation. Her place within the family had always been defined more by restraint than provocation, which made the force of her statement impossible to dismiss as ordinary royal friction. During a private family gathering, she drew a distinction that instantly raised the emotional stakes. The Queen could hold the constitutional position beside the King, but rank did not automatically replace memory. Diana, Princess of Wales, had occupied a deeply personal place in the family long before titles were rearranged, and Louise was saying those two realities could exist at the same time. Camilla froze. The Queen consort placed her teacup down and looked directly at Louise before asking, "Is that truly what you believe?" The question was quiet, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable. Louise did not retreat. Her hands trembled slightly, yet she answered that she was talking about memory, not rank. A royal rank, the formal position a family member holds within the monarchy, could change through marriage, succession, or circumstance. Emotional memory could not be reassigned so easily. William heard every word. The prince remained silent as Camilla turned toward him, clearly expecting some correction, some signal that Louise had gone too far. None came. His silence changed the balance of the moment, because Diana was not an abstract figure to him, she was his mother. William did not endorse the attack, but he also refused to erase the distinction Louise had drawn. That silence unsettled Camilla even more. The Queen consort had spent years building legitimacy beside Charles, yet one sentence had exposed the difference between being accepted in the present and replacing someone in the past. Louise had not challenged her crown. She had challenged the idea that a crown could overwrite memory. Then Charles entered. The king immediately sensed that something had happened. Louise went quiet. Camilla did not explain. William looked away. For several tense seconds, nobody wanted to become the person who repeated the sentence aloud. But Charles eventually demanded to know, and when he heard exactly what Louise had said, the dispute stopped being about a young royal speaking too boldly. It became a confrontation with a wound the family had spent decades trying to contain. Before the palace could decide how to respond, one question had to be answered first. Why had Louise chosen Diana's memory as the line she would not allow anyone to cross? Louise was not speaking as a politician, a courtier, or a rival competing for influence. That was precisely what made her statement so difficult to dismiss. She belonged to a generation that had inherited Diana largely through stories, photographs, memories, and the emotions of older relatives. And when Louise challenged Camilla's place in that emotional history, she exposed something the palace hierarchy could neither command nor rewrite. Affection cannot be inherited with a title. Lady Louise Windsor had grown up differently from many relatives closer to the center of royal life. Her parents, Prince Edward and Sophie, had guarded a comparatively private upbringing, keeping much of her childhood away from the constant pressure surrounding senior working royals. That term refers to family members who regularly carry out official duties on behalf of the crown. Louise understood the institution, but she had never been trained to treat every family feeling as something that needed to be politically useful. Sophie understood why that made the statement dangerous. The trusted confidant closed her daughter's bedroom door behind them and asked whether Louise truly understood how deeply those words could hurt Charles. Louise did not become defensive. She simply told her mother that silence would have felt more dishonest. Sophie pressed again, almost pleading this time. If she could take the sentence back, would she? Louise looked at her mother and said no. Edward struggled differently. The Duke understood Charles's position and knew how fiercely his brother had defended Camilla's place beside him. Yet he also understood his daughter. Forcing Louise to retract a sincere belief would not erase it. Edward told Sophie that making her apologize for the emotion itself could turn one painful sentence into a deeper family fracture. The conflict carried history with it. Camilla held an established constitutional role beside Charles, meaning her position belonged to the formal structure surrounding the reigning king. Diana's place was something else entirely. For William and Harry, she remained their mother. For much of the public, she remained tied to memories of their childhood, grief, and a royal era that never fully disappeared. Louise believed those two realities did not have to compete. William eventually found her alone in a corridor. The prince did not scold her. He did not thank her either. He simply said, "You didn't need to do that for me." Louise answered that she had not done it only for him. She told William that Diana's memory was too often treated as though mentioning it somehow diminished Camilla. The prince listened carefully, because the distinction mattered. Louise was not trying to remove the queen consort from the present. She was refusing to let the past be rewritten for the sake of comfort. And that refusal had a beginning. Weeks earlier, one seemingly minor royal gathering had changed the way Louise heard Diana's name inside the family. She had stayed silent then. She would not stay silent twice. Every palace rupture has a moment that looks insignificant, until everything after it suddenly makes sense. For Louise, that moment came weeks earlier, during preparations for a family remembrance display at Windsor. A conversation that should have lasted seconds became the emotional point of no return. Diana's photograph was mentioned. Camilla's position was discussed, and Louise watched the temperature of the room change. What she heard that afternoon stayed with her until silence became impossible. Louise had joined relatives discussing photographs and personal objects for a private Windsor remembrance display honoring earlier generations of the family. This was not a constitutional ceremony or an official ranking exercise. It was family history. That distinction mattered because constitutional hierarchy, the formal order of status and responsibility inside the monarchy, could explain who stood where today, but it could not dictate which memories deserved greater emotional space. Then Diana's photograph became the problem. A senior household aide suggested moving it away from a prominent family grouping because keeping it too central might create an awkward comparison with Camilla. Louise heard the words herself. She immediately looked toward William. The prince did not argue. He became completely still, closed the folder in front of him, and left the conversation earlier than expected. Louise could not forget his reaction. Later, she asked Sophie why Diana's photograph needed to become smaller emotionally, simply because Charles had remarried. The trusted confidant warned her daughter that families often carry contradictions they cannot neatly solve. Sophie was not defending the suggestion, but she understood why everyone feared touching the subject. Louise heard something else in that caution. The family had become so frightened of discomfort that Diana's memory could be adjusted before Camilla even asked for anything. That became more troubling when Louise learned the queen consort had never personally ordered the photograph removed. Camilla had not demanded the change. Nobody could point to an instruction from her. Yet in Louise's mind, that almost made the problem worse. People were anticipating Camilla's possible feelings and editing Diana's place accordingly. The pressure was operating without anyone needing to issue a command. William eventually returned to the discussion. The prince quietly took Diana's photograph, placed it back in its original position, adjusted the frame, and walked away without explaining himself. No speech followed. No argument was necessary. Louise understood exactly what he meant. The photograph stayed where it had been, but the moment stayed with Louise too. Weeks later, when Camilla challenged her directly, Louise was no longer reacting to one sentence or one awkward conversation. She was reacting to a pattern in which Diana's memory seemed repeatedly vulnerable to other people's discomfort. And once the queen consort demanded an explanation, the argument the family had avoided for decades finally had nowhere left to hide. Camilla could have allowed aides to handle it. She could have waited for Charles, spoken through Sophie, or dismissed Louise's remark as youthful emotion. Instead, she walked directly toward the young royal who had spoken Diana's name and asked the question nobody expected her to ask. "Do you think I tried to replace her?" Suddenly, titles disappeared. There was no queen confronting a junior royal, only two women standing on opposite sides of an old family wound. Sophie wanted to go with her daughter. The trusted confidant understood how quickly a private family disagreement could harden into something formal, especially once palace staff became involved. A formal disciplinary problem, in royal terms, would mean the issue being handled through household channels rather than simply as a family conversation. Louise refused that protection. She told her mother she had spoken the words herself, so she would answer for them herself. Sophie let her go, but not without warning her to choose honesty over cruelty. Camilla did not waste time. The queen consort told Louise that living beside Diana's memory had never been simple. She said she had never believed marrying Charles could erase another woman's importance, especially to William and Harry. Louise listened, then answered with the distinction that had been building inside her for weeks. Replacement, she said, did not always happen because someone demanded it. Sometimes the people around a family simply kept adjusting the past until the present felt easier. Camilla gripped the back of a chair. The queen consort asked whether William had encouraged the statement. Louise answered immediately. No, the prince had not told her what to say, and he had not asked her to defend Diana. Louise would not allow the confrontation to become another accusation against him. Then Louise told her about Windsor. She described the remembrance discussion, the suggestion that Diana's photograph be moved, and the strange hesitation that followed. Camilla listened as the young royal explained that the queen herself had never requested the change. That was exactly what had disturbed Louise. People were anticipating discomfort before Camilla even expressed it. Diana's memory, she believed, was being managed because everyone feared what it might stir. Camilla released the chair slowly. "You have made your position unmistakably clear," she said. Louise did not apologize for the belief, but neither did she attack the queen consort further. The conversation ended without victory. Camilla left shaken. Louise remained convinced. Sophie met her daughter afterward, and immediately understood that nothing had been resolved. Because Louise had challenged more than Camilla's feelings. She had touched the oldest fracture in Charles's family. And behind the next closed door, the king would have to decide whether protecting his wife meant confronting the younger generation or finally admitting that memory could not be commanded. The king could not order people to feel differently. That was the uncomfortable truth waiting for Charles when the details reached him. He could defend Camilla's dignity, demand greater respect, and insist that family disagreements remain private. But Louise had not challenged the crown's legal authority. She had challenged something far less controllable, memory. And as Charles listened to the sentence repeated back to him, anger slowly gave way to a far more painful emotion: recognition. Charles understood the distinction immediately, even if he disliked it. Camilla's position as his wife and queen was not in question. The crown's legal authority means the formal power and status attached to the sovereign, and those officially recognized beside him. Louise had challenged none of that. She had argued that Diana's emotional legacy could not simply be transferred. Senior courtiers urged the king to keep the dispute private because any public correction risked turning the episode into another Diana versus Camilla battle. Charles was still angry. The king told Edward that Louise had been unnecessarily cruel and should understand the burden carried by those living at the center of royal life. Edward did not become defensive. The Duke calmly reminded his brother that his daughter had not questioned Camilla's title. She had questioned whether any title could overwrite emotional history. Charles listened, but the answer did not comfort him. William arrived later for a private conversation. The prince immediately made clear that he had not encouraged Louise, coached her, or asked anyone to defend Diana on his behalf. Charles accepted that. Then the king asked his son to condemn the central sentiment anyway. William would not. The prince told his father that Louise's wording had been sharp, but he could not describe the basic idea as false. Diana remained his mother. Camilla remained Charles's wife and queen. Those truths did not need to destroy each other. Charles asked the harder question. Had Camilla ever been treated as though she had to replace Diana? William paused before answering. Sometimes the institution tried to make the comparison disappear, instead of allowing both truths to exist. That sentence changed the king's anger. Charles understood what William meant. Attempts to protect Camilla from comparison had sometimes created the very comparison everyone feared. So the monarch made his decision. Louise would not be forced into an apology for what she believed. Charles would insist on respect, but he would not demand a false retraction. William left quietly. Charles remained alone. The king looked at a family photograph for several long seconds before turning it face down, not in rejection, but because he could no longer bear everything it represented at once. One rupture had been contained, but Camilla would immediately understand what Charles' restraint meant. The king had protected her dignity. He had not declared Louise wrong. There was no shouting when Camilla learned that Louise would not be ordered to retract her words. That silence was worse. She listened as Charles explained that the monarchy could protect her official dignity, but could not compel another person to surrender a private emotional judgment. Camilla nodded once. Then she asked the question that revealed what had truly wounded her. Does William agree with her? Charles's hesitation provided the answer before he spoke. Charles chose his words carefully. The king explained that no public correction would be issued and Louise would face no institutional punishment because the dispute concerned personal memory, not constitutional standing. That distinction mattered. Constitutional standing meant a person's formal place and authority within the monarchy, and Louise had not challenged Camilla's legal or official position. The household was also instructed not to encourage comparisons between Diana and the queen consort, because turning private pain into a public contest would only deepen the damage. Camilla absorbed the decision quietly. The queen consort told Charles she could survive hostility from newspapers, commentators, and people who had never accepted her. Rejection from inside the family was different. That hurt, because it suggested that years of loyalty beside the king could never fully protect her from being treated as emotionally temporary. Charles struggled to answer. The monarch wanted to defend his wife, but forcing Louise into a false apology would solve nothing. He knew that. Camilla knew it too. Yet emotionally, restraint still felt dangerously close to abandonment. Then Charles admitted the part she already suspected. William had not condemned Louise's central point. Camilla lowered her eyes. The queen consort understood what that meant. Decades had passed. Titles had changed. The family had changed. But Diana's place inside William's emotional world remained untouched. Charles did not try to soften that truth. He simply sat with it beside her. And then Camilla surprised him. She said Louise should not be pressured. The queen consort refused to demand acceptance through coercion. If the young royal apologized only because the palace frightened her into doing so, Camilla said, the words would mean nothing. Charles looked at his wife differently after that. For the first time since the crisis began, she was no longer fighting to protect her place. She was accepting that some parts of belonging could never be commanded. Charles eventually left. Camilla remained alone beside an untouched cup of tea. She removed her glasses, wiped her eyes once, then straightened herself before the next aide entered. Something had shifted. The argument was no longer about who had spoken too harshly. It was about whether two painful truths could exist at the same time. And William was about to test exactly that possibility. No aides entered the room. No private secretary took notes. And no prepared language stood between William and Camilla when they finally sat opposite one another. For years, Diana's memory had existed between them like an invisible third person rarely addressed directly, always present. Louise's statement had ripped away that protection. Now Camilla wanted one answer from Diana's eldest son, and William understood that whatever he said next would define more than their relationship. William had asked for the meeting because he realized his silence during Louise's confrontation could easily be mistaken for hostility. The prince did not want advisors interpreting his feelings, or palace gossip filling the gaps. Camilla agreed for the same reason. A private secretary, the senior aide who normally helps manage a royal's official work and communication, would not be present. For once, nobody else would translate what either of them meant. Camilla asked the question directly. Did William truly believe she had spent years trying to occupy Diana's emotional place? No, he said. The answer came without hesitation. William then added the part that mattered just as much. The prince told her his mother's place in his life could never be reassigned, renamed, or inherited by someone else. That was not an attack on Camilla. It was simply the truth. The queen consort listened without interrupting, and for the first time, the two were speaking without trying to protect everyone else from the subject. Camilla admitted something of her own. She told William that there had been times when she allowed the palace to avoid Diana's name because the comparison had become exhausting. She had not demanded that Diana be diminished, but she had sometimes accepted silence because silence felt easier. The queen consort now understood how that avoidance could look from the other side. William did not pretend Louise's words had been gentle. He said the statement was harsh, but it had exposed something the family needed to hear. Respecting Camilla did not require shrinking Diana. Honoring Diana did not require humiliating the queen consort. The prince believed both truths could exist without one destroying the other. Camilla looked at him and finally said the sentence she had probably carried for years. I never wanted your mother's place. William answered just as quietly. Then we shouldn't behave as though giving her one threatens yours. Neither raised their voice. Neither needed to. Something settled between them. Not affection manufactured by duty. Not forgiveness forced by circumstance. Just clarity. William left first. Camilla remained behind for several moments before leaving separately. Inside that room, the oldest emotional battle had finally lost some of its power. Outside it, Louise's 11 explosive words were already escaping the palace and becoming tomorrow morning's defining royal headline. By sunrise, Louise's private sentence belonged to everyone. Television studios were discussing it, phones were lighting up, and photographs of Diana and Camilla were once again appearing side by side. But the public reaction was more complicated than a simple contest between two women. Louise had accidentally opened a national conversation about whether accepting the monarchy's present required rewriting its emotional past, and one extraordinary image outside Kensington Palace captured that feeling better than any commentator could. Sophie watched the coverage beside her daughter and immediately understood how quickly the story had escaped the family. Palace Communications, the official system used to manage statements and public messaging, refused to attack Louise or turn the disagreement into a formal dispute. The line was simple: this was a private family matter. Yet every broadcaster understood why the story mattered. A younger royal had stepped directly into one of the monarchy's most painful emotional histories, and Louise had done so without hiding behind anonymity. Louise felt the pressure almost immediately. She had expected criticism, but she had not expected to become the face of a conflict older than she was. Sophie worried that her daughter would now be blamed for reopening wounds she had not created. The trusted confidant reminded Louise that once words leave a private room, other people decide what they mean. Louise understood that more painfully each hour. Then the tone of the coverage began to trouble her. Some commentators used her words as permission to attack Camilla personally, and Louise hated that. She told Sophie she had never meant cruelty. The queen consort's present role was not the target. Louise had been defending memory, not inviting humiliation. William supported restraint behind the scenes. The prince backed a neutral palace response because he did not want Diana's memory weaponized against Camilla, nor did he want the queen consort's position used to diminish his mother. That balance mattered. William had spent years living between those two realities, and he knew exactly how destructive a public contest could become. Then one image changed the conversation. Outside Kensington Palace, a small crowd gathered near tributes associated with Diana's memory. One woman placed 2 white roses beneath a photograph and left a handwritten card. Remembering her does not require hating anyone else. Television cameras captured the message, and by evening, it had become the emotional center of the coverage. Louise saw it and went quiet. For the first time, she understood that the public had transformed her sentence. What began as an accusation was becoming a distinction between remembrance and replacement. And that left only one thing unresolved. Louise now had to explain what she truly meant. Not whether Camilla belonged, but why Diana's place had never been vacant in the first place. In the end, Louise's most important words were not the ones that created the scandal, they were the ones that ended it. She had never been demanding Camilla's removal, denying her marriage, or challenging her position beside the king. She had been drawing a boundary between succession and sentiment, between the role a person performs and the place another person permanently occupies inside a family. Once that distinction was finally spoken aloud, the confrontation began losing its power to divide them. Louise explained that distinction privately to Sophie and Edward before speaking to anyone else. She told her parents she still stood by the meaning of what she had said, but regretted that some people had used those words as permission to humiliate Camilla. Sophie listened carefully. Edward did too. The couple understood that their daughter was not retreating, she was refining the boundary. Institutional legitimacy, the formal acceptance and authority attached to a royal position, was never what Louise had challenged. She had challenged the idea that emotional memory could be reassigned. Charles eventually accepted the same truth. The king understood that Diana's legacy and Camilla's present role did not need to fight for the same space. One belonged to memory, motherhood, and a history that shaped William forever. The other belonged to Charles's present marriage and the responsibilities Camilla now carried beside him. Treating those places as identical had only created pain. Louise asked to speak with Camilla once more. This time, the queen consort did not confront her. Louise told her plainly, "I was defending a memory. I was not asking anyone to punish you." Camilla admitted the original statement had hurt deeply. But she also acknowledged something the family had avoided for too long. Mentioning Diana had repeatedly been treated as though it automatically became a judgment on everyone who survived her. William later learned about that conversation. The prince felt something close to relief. His mother's place had finally been defended without requiring another woman to be destroyed in the process. That mattered, because he had spent years watching the family behave as though honoring Diana and respecting Camilla could not happen at the same time. Charles reached the hardest conclusion last. Diana's place had never needed to be filled because it had never become vacant. Camilla's place beside him was different, separate, real in its own right, and that became the final verdict. Camilla could be queen without becoming Diana. Diana could remain irreplaceable without diminishing Camilla. Louise had forced the family to say aloud what it had resisted